Hello listeners, if you've enjoyed these narrations, please click on that like and subscribe button. Tonight's story is part 1 of a series called The Winter Wendigo. Please enjoy. Do you believe in the supernatural and the things that go bump in the night? I surely didn't until my wife was acting unusual. Let me start from the beginning for more context. It was late winter night. My wife and I were heading to our cabin in the middle of the Canadian woods near Lake Candos, which was about 5 miles away from the nearest settlement. It's a nice secluded oak tavern, no different to any you see in the movies, surrounded by beautiful pine trees as far as the eye can see, and the lake only being 500 yards from the front of the tavern. During this time of the year, the lakes are frozen from the extreme cold, but still showing its natural beauty. "Are we there yet?" my wife called out, frustrated. "We're almost there." Barely holding my own frustration, I had been on a long 5-hour trip, and the heater was not working properly, causing our trip to be bitter and cold. From when we left our summer place early in the afternoon, traveling was not the easiest during this time, as we had to take many road detours, adding many hours to our journey. Plus, my wife's constant belittling of me made the journey a lot more harder than it really was. "Look out!" I was so busy in my own thoughts that the sudden shouting took me out of my haze. I slammed on brakes, smacking my head onto the wheel. I looked up and saw that my beams were shining on a deer, standing only meters from my hood. I saw the deer's face staring at me. I felt an odd sensation before me, a cold, mocking, and sadistic tone emanating from those cold and lifeless black eyes. It perked up and ran off into the void of night. "Dan! Dan!" I was shot back and heard my wife screaming at me. "Dan, you almost got us killed with your incompetent driving." "Sorry, dear." "Sorry? Is that all you've got to say is sorry?" She slapped me over my head, gesturing not to do that again. I turned to face her, but something caught my eyes. Something in the distance is heading straight towards us. "What's the matter now? You're pale as a ghost." I pointed out the window on her side, and she looked. "What? There's nothing there." Could I be imagining those two glowing eyes? There was no way. I can't just imagine them. I know they were there. "Can you turn on the engine? We still got 30 minutes before we get to our cabin," she retorted angrily. She punched me, and I got out of my daze again. I started up the engine and headed off towards our cabin, still pondering those two glowing eyes. The snow was getting heavier, making it harder to see the road. Luckily, we made it to the cabin without any more runs into the wildlife or those glowing eyes. We got there before the snow really turned on us, and we ran into our cabin and quickly closed the door behind us. "Finally, we're here," I exclaimed happily over the long 5-hour drive we'd just been over. "Almost killing your wife," muttered as she walked past up the stairs, not even glancing back at me. "I guess I'll just start the fire," I said. No reassuring words came from my wife, except a grunt. I sighed as I headed towards the cabin fire pit. The cabin wasn't the best, but it was passed down from my father, and so on, so it was kind of a family heirloom. My wife doesn't see the beauty as she huffs and heaves her luggage towards the upstairs bedroom. As I lit the fire, I noticed an unusual feeling, like the whole room felt colder than the outside. It felt like something was watching me, peering into the depth of my soul. This unnerving feeling brought chills down my spine. I looked over to make sure that my wife was okay. She had just made it up to her room. I lit my match and watched as the flames engulfed the logs, turning them from brown to black. The light from the flames flickered, making the shadows dance all through the back hall. I stood up and turned around, and froze. I turned as white as a ghost, and before me, 2 eyes staring at me. The same 2 starry white eyes I saw a mere moment earlier that nearly caused me to crash. those milky eyes staring at me from the window. My stomach dropped and all my fears came true. Staring down those two eyes, I couldn't move. I was frozen in panic. The whole world stood still in that very instant. I was too afraid to move. I don't want to provoke the creature, whatever it was standing outside my window. The only thing that broke my stance was my wife screaming at me. The eyes darted around my living room to find the source and quickly vanished as the loud scream echoed throughout the cabin. I ran up to see my wife throwing the lamp at me, screaming as I entered the bedroom, screaming about God knows what this time. The lamp hit my face, causing blood to rush down my face. I put my hand up and a sharp pain echoed throughout my head. I flinched from the pain and to look up at my wife screaming at me about something, but I couldn't focus. All I could focus on was the splitting headache and the blood trickling down my face. As I looked at her, my face contorted into an expression of pure anger. "What is it? What are you yelling about?" She pulled out a sheet of paper and shoved it towards my chest. "What do you mean, what?" she hissed. "You're divorcing me? On our trip? 17 years I put up with this. 17 long years you treated me with disrespect. You worthless man. You've never done anything for me." With those stinging words, I felt my world shatter. So after all this time, she never loved me. I knew we were growing distant after our attempt at a child, but hearing those words brought pain. I turned around and ran down the stairs towards my car. I got in and drove all the while my wife was cursing and throwing absurd slurs at me. The nearest town was about 5 miles, a 30-minute trip in this weather. That's all the time I needed to clear my head. I made it to town just before 8 p.m. I spotted an old-looking bar and headed towards it. It was a rudimentary and old-style bar, resembling a 1950s bar. It was a hell of a lot better being there than being at the house at the moment. As the moment I walked in, the whole atmosphere was very welcoming. I saw the table counter and went straight for it and ordered a double shot of whiskey with some chips. "Hey, how you doing? Is everything okay?" the waiter asked. I looked up and smiled, and he walked off. I decided to have a quick glance around the bar, and as I was looking around and admiring the decor, the first thing that caught my eyes wasn't the decor resembling the 50s. It was the giant skull perched up on the bar table. As I was looking up at the decor, a wave of awe and fear came over me. I did not know that such a creature existed, let alone the fact it could easily hunt us down. "It's called a Wendigo." I looked around and saw a person sitting alone. "Pardon me?" "It's a Wendigo skull. Those creatures are native to these parts." I looked back in amazement. "But I thought these creatures were just stuff of legends. Do they actually exist?" "Very much. If you see those two glowing eyes, your fate is sealed," the old geezer grunted. "Sounds like a load of bullcrap to me." He looked at me with a grumpy expression and stood up. "Well, boy, is this real enough for you?" He lifted up his shirt to reveal 3 massive claw marks on his stomach. I looked wide-eyed at him. "I can't believe what I'm seeing. Are you sure it wasn't a bear claw? Maybe a bear attack?" "No bears hibernate during this time. It's easy prey for those things." I looked back at the skull and into those empty black sockets. "How did you kill it?" "I didn't. I managed to wound the creature before it ran off into the forest. You need to be careful, boy. These creatures that lie and pretend to be people you love all to get closer, and that's when they strike." I looked at the skull, and then I remembered seeing the glowing eyes as my face panicked. "Oh no, the cabin." "What's up, boy?" "You said the Wendigo's eyes, they glow white, right?" "That's right." "My wife is in a lot of danger right now. I have to go." "Come again, lad?" "On the way here I nearly hit a deer, and when I looked out I saw 2 glowing eyes, but my wife didn't. The next incident was when I was lighting the flame out of the window. "Well, boy, you better drive home quickly." I ran out of the bar as quickly as I could, not worrying about the seatbelt as I sped off. All I could do was worry about my wife, Ari. I couldn't get the thought of her being dead on the couch with her guts ripped out of my head. All I could do was speed down the road. I hit 90 miles per hour. I could feel my car shaking as it wasn't meant to go this fast, but I was the least of my concern. My face went pale as I drove up the driveway and saw big scratches on the ground leading up to the way towards the cabin. I got my flashlight and ran through the blistering cold to see the door off its hinges. My heart sank when I saw the state of the house. I moved the door and all of my coloring drained from my body. My house was wrecked. There were signs of a fight and struggle. Blood was covering the floor in one corner, all the way up to the wall. I feared the worst. My wife may have been slaughtered by a Wendigo. I looked around and my heart jumped when I heard, "Dan?" I saw her in the corner of the room, shaking uncontrollably. "Are you alright, baby?" "Yes, love, I'm alright. A giant moose came smashing through and he destroyed everything." I looked at her in disbelief and towards the door. How could a moose do that? Puzzled at the claw marks on the door, no moose could have even produced those marks, let alone fit in this cabin. I looked at her and wanted to ask more, but she had passed out. Not wanting to push it any further, I grabbed my wife and headed up towards the bedroom and laid her on our bed. I looked back at her in confusion. Why would she lie about a moose attack? And why was there so much blood everywhere? Oh God, the blood. That was gonna take a while. Dreading tomorrow's house chores, out in the dark forest, I pondered to myself what nightmares laid out there, and how long they've been there. I heard my wife rustling the blankets, and quickly covered her and extinguished the light. That night I didn't get much sleep as our incident at the bar and running home to find a bloody mess left me in so many unanswered questions. Why did my wife lie to me? Was the skull truly a Wendigo? I finally got some sleep around 1 a.m., but that was short-lived as I suffered from nightmares, and this day didn't help. I woke up to the smell of eggs and bacon simmering through the house. Drawn to the smell, I headed downstairs to see my wife, singing a happy tune and smiling. I took one step and she perked around so quickly. "Good morning, darling. I cooked you breakfast." "Thank you." I pulled my chair out from the table to sit down. As I was doing so, my wife walked up and placed the plate in front of me and gave me a kiss. I tried to hide my shock and confusion, but my face betrayed me. "What's wrong, dear? Is the eggs too runny, or did I burn the bacon?" "No, they're perfect. It's just, I'm surprised you're up this early." I lied. "Oh, really? Why's that?" "Well, you're usually not up before me," I quickly replied, not wanting her to see the confusion and terror on my face while I sipped my coffee. "Is that so? Well, I guess I just wanted to cook you some breakfast." As I was eating, I thought back to the events last night. "So, babe, about last night." "Oh, don't worry about it. I already cleaned up, and I fixed the door while you were asleep." I looked stunned, and looked at the entrance of the cabin near the fireplace. What she said was true. The door looked brand new, and on its hinges, and there was no sign of blood anywhere. It looked like it was cleaned by a professional cleaning crew. "How did you even..." She put a finger on my lip. "Don't worry." She got up from her chair and headed over to the cabin to pull a box full of bandages and medicine. "I noticed that you got a nasty little scratch on your head. Let me clean that and dress the wound for you." I held my terror in as she was cleaning and dressing my wound, whining as the alcohol stung my scar. I forgot all about last night with everything going on, but why did she not remember throwing a lamp at my head? That's just strange. I don't understand what's going on. What about the divorce papers? Ivory looked over at me sad. Can you please get dressed and meet me by the lake? I saw the sadness in her eyes and I nodded to reply to her question. It took me longer to get dressed with so many thoughts going through me. I ran outside to see Ivory standing by the front porch looking towards the lake. Let's go. The soft crunch of the snow under our feet did not ease the atmosphere between us as we were slowly walking. She then stopped and looked at me, the cold wind blowing her fiery red hair and her gorgeous green eyes reflecting the stars. Babe, why do you want a divorce? And that question made me slip with my words as I tried to find an answer. Doesn't she remember the 17 years she had treated me like garbage? The abuse she did? I was beyond comprehension, filled with rage at that question. But before I answered, I put out a hand to hold mine. The moment her hand and mine, I felt the coldness in her. It was unnatural. Her hands shouldn't have been that cold. They should be frostbitten. But yet they're beautiful and delicate. I flinched and pulled my hand away. She looked at me teary-eyed and knelt onto the ground. Please, baby, give me one more chance. I love you so very much. I looked at her kneeling on the ground, wailing as if she lost the most important thing in her life. I needed time to think about this. I picked up the paper and put them in my pocket and walked off without saying a word to my wife. She looked up crying, and as I looked down at her and said nothing, I walked back into the cabin and looked around to see that last night's incident was totally gone. I sat on the couch thinking about the past 24 hours when I suddenly dozed off. By the time I woke up, I saw my wife staring at me from the door handle. Her expression was of nothing. The truth was that it freaked me out a bit. She walked past me not saying a word and headed straight up to our bedroom. Turning back towards the fireplace, I saw that the log had been put out and scattered around. I got up and put the log back in the fireplace when I heard what sounded like a deer coming from the woods. Scared me a bit, but that was when the most awful and gut-wrenching sound replied. The only way I can describe it is if you took the sound of a deer and slowed it and then had it massacred. I'm not sure what it is, but I believe I'll have a hard time sleeping tonight as well.